Dr. Raywat Deonandan. He is an epidemiologist, associate professor, Faculty of Health Sciences, University of Ottawa, joins us today. Hello, Dr. Deonandan.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. What are your thoughts, Raywat, when it comes to the idea of schools having random COVID tests?
I think it's a great idea. And the reason is testing is our best tool to get us out of the emergency phase of this pandemic in absence of a vaccine. And the more we can test, the better. And there are two kinds of testing we can do. One is diagnostic and the other is surveillance. Diagnostic testing is when you show up to your doctor because you've got symptoms and you think you might have a disease. And then he would test you to see what you have and to give you the appropriate therapy. But surveillance testing is when we figure out who's got the disease so that we can quarantine them and do contact tracing. And this is what this is all about. It's surveillance testing, hunting for incidences of the disease, even in asymptomatic carriers. So the more we do this, the better chance we have of controlling outbreaks in schools.
And when you say the more we do this, how would you envision that? Would you have public health nurses at all schools doing it on a daily basis? How do you see that rolling out?
That's a good question. It depends entirely on the kind of capacity you have. So ideally, if you had an unlimited number of tests, then yeah, you just flood the schools with the daily testing. And public health nurses are the obvious people to do it. Now, it's not comfortable. The nasopharyngeal swabs are not fun. And so that's going to be a barrier. And the wait times in the labs and the delays in getting test results back will also be a barrier. But we're hoping to get the rapid tests available sometime soon. A big game changer would be the rapid on-site test that can give you results in like 5 to 15 minutes. And those would be spit tests. Those are coming, right? So when those arrive, then imagine your daily routine involves spitting into a cup, waiting 10 minutes, and then figuring out if it's safe to go to school. So, yeah, that's the kind of future I think we will have when the technologies come, if a vaccine is not available.
Raywat, even when you mentioned nasal test, here in Alberta, we're doing mostly the throat swabs. Is one more effective than the other, or is it ultimately a test?
Well, they're kind of the same. So it's a nasopharyngeal swab. It's that stuff behind the back of your mouth and nose. That's where the mucus, accumulates. But, I mean, there are going to be some sensitivity issues depending upon where you do the swabs and how long it's been since exposure. You've got to wait a couple of days for sufficient viral load to accumulate before a test result will be meaningful. That's why you can test negative today and yet still be infected. You have to wait a little while to make sure. So with surveillance testing, it doesn't tell you if you've got the disease necessarily. It just tells you, are you likely to be infectious? That's a subtle distinction that people need to understand.
Well, continue to explain, though, because we have been hearing time and time again that children don't have as severe symptoms, but they could be asymptomatic. And a lot of people are saying, well, if kids aren't going to be impacted the same way, will the tests be effective in determining whether or not they've got it?
So first of all, kids under 10 are about 3 times more likely to be asymptomatic than people over 10, which is a problem. This is an asymptomatic pandemic. And so testing asymptomatic people is more or less as effective as testing symptomatic ones. Symptomatic ones are more easy to detect for obvious reasons, and they tend to have higher viral loads. But about 2 or 3 days after first exposure, whether or not you're symptomatic or not, you're probably producing enough stuff for us to detect it. So, yeah, we can still detect it amongst children. Remember, we don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. A lot of these tests aren't very sensitive, and if you do it imperfectly, you're going to miss a few. That's okay. It's a matter of layering over a variety of strategies. You do the testing, you do the distancing, you wear the hand washing and the mask wearing. When all these things are layered on top of each other, then you've got a safe system. One thing alone will not do the job.
Schools are still trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do if a child tests positive. Have you heard what is working or what could be a good plan? Because some people are saying if one student in that class, does that mean we shut down the school? Does it mean we shut down the class? For how long? What have you heard?
Well, I've heard a variety of things across the country, but I will say it depends on the kind of setup you have in the school. I call it a cellular system. If you have limited the exposures that child has on a daily basis, for example, if they're only playing with the same 15 students every single day and they only have one teacher every single day, then we can take that one cohort, that one cell out of the system if one student tests positive. You send them home for a week while you investigate. If, on the other hand, you have a high school environment where people are going to multiple classes, that entire year probably should be sent home for a week while you investigate. And the investigation consists of figuring out who's been in contact with whom, watching for symptoms, and doing some degree of testing of all contacts. Closing down an entire school is a worst case scenario, and a lot of the strategies, like the staggering of cohorts and things like that, are built around the need to avoid that eventuality. We can shut down entire grades maybe, or entire cohorts, but let's leave this school shutdown as a last resort. It may come to that in some cases, though.
Yeah. What about the idea of testing the temperature, the gun thermometer or whatever? What are your thoughts on that? Because we've often heard that may not be a true indicator.
Frankly, my position is mostly performative, because, you can have the disease and not have a temperature. You can have the temperature and not have the disease. Yeah. You can have the temperature and the disease and take some Tylenol and suppress it. Right? So all these things are in play. It doesn't make it a great test. However, it's something. It's one level of protection. When added to the other stuff, it may prevent or detect one case over the course of the year. If you can prevent one case from entering the system, well, that's great. So it's the return on investment we think about here. What's the price of doing a temperature check? Pretty low. What's the possible return on investment if you catch one case? Pretty high. So it's probably worthwhile doing, but it doesn't mean a lot in absence of these other strategies.
The idea of parents having their child tested for COVID before they go to school. I wonder if some people are saying, all right, I tested them 2 weeks before, was fine, I'm out of the woods. That's just that point in time. So would parents have to be going once a week to have their child tested, or teachers being tested once a week?
I think the idea there is you establish a baseline of safety. So when the school starts, we know that no one is infectious going into the system. So any new infections that do manifest throughout the school year are probably the result of stuff coming in from the outside. It makes contact tracing easier. It makes identifying the source of the outbreak easier. I think that's the logic behind that approach. But absolutely, you should not consider yourself to be in the clear simply because you test negative on that one day. Ideally, with sufficient capacity, we should be testing regularly. And in a perfect world, we have a vaccine. But in a lesser perfect world, we'd be testing every single day at a low impact setting with a rapid return, so that you can be sure that before you go to school, your kid is safe and the other kids that he or she will interact with are also safe.
Have you heard anything as far as the rapid test, especially the on-site rapid tests, or is that something months away? Or because at one point we thought rapid tests, even in a hospital setting, was going to happen, and then that changed.
Yeah, exactly right. So I'm hesitant to give any kind of predictions. I do know that several are floating around the market, but they have to be okayed by FDA and Health Canada. Here's the thing, though. We have to get out of the mindset of it being perfect. And one of the ways they're being assessed is, are they great diagnostic tests for clinics? They don't have to be. They just have to be good enough to get some sense of who has it. Right? And it's okay if you get a lot of false positives. I'd rather have false positives than false negatives. Then we just go and investigate those false positives to rule them out. So once we're out of that mindset, I think they'll change the threshold for the tests that are allowed into the system. So I suspect we'll have something really to play with in 3 months. If I have to put a number on the timeline, and don't quote me on that.
I won't. But our listeners will. No, I'm kidding. Raywat, we've got an interesting year ahead of us, a school year ahead of us, and that's an understatement. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Dr.
Raywat Deonandan, epidemiologist, associate professor, Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa.